The Zereth did not fear humanity when they conquered Earth. Why would they? To them, humans were brittle, short-lived creatures barely able to survive outside their cradle world without machines. Fragile bones, soft flesh, 1,000 vulnerabilities waiting to break. When the Zereth fleets descended in black skies and blinding fire, resistance lasted less than a season. Cities burned, armies fell, and those who lived became property. And so began the silence. The Zereth mines stretched deep into the marrow of Earth. Caverns so wide they swallowed mountains. Chains clattered there, always chains. Human men and women, once engineers, doctors, teachers, children, now dragged carts filled with ore beneath alien overseers. The air was thick with dust and despair, but worse than either was the soundlessness. Humans did not sing anymore. The Zereth forbade it. Whips cracked at the first sign of laughter, the first hum of melody. In those dark mines, Joran lifted stone after stone with trembling arms. Once he had been a student of physics, solving equations about the stars. Now his world was the tunnel ahead, the ache in his back, the chain biting into his wrist. His hands bled, but his eyes still watched, still measured, still remembered. He did not speak, but inside he whispered to himself, "This is not forever." Above the mines and the shattered husk of what was once Chicago, Lyra clutched her child against her chest. She remembered skyscrapers filled with light. Now only black spires of alien industry pierced the clouds, draining Earth's air into fuel for Zereth warships. Her daughter, barely 7, asked once, "Why can't we go home?" Lyra had no answer. Yet when she looked at her little girl's thin face, she forced herself to smile. She could not give hope in words, but she gave it in the way she stood, in the way she endured. The Zereth mistook this silence for defeat. Admiral Karos, a towering figure with obsidian scales and eyes like molten iron, once stood on the balcony of his fortress overlooking Earth's enslaved cities. "The humans," he said to his council, "are docile livestock. They break easily, but once broken, they stay broken. This world is ours forever." His generals hissed their agreement. Chains, they believed, could strangle the will as easily as the body. But deep beneath their feet in the mines and the ruined cities, humanity's silence was not surrender. It was waiting. Waiting, because the broken know how to rise. Waiting because pain sharpens memory. Waiting because fragility teaches you how to bend without snapping. There were nights in the barracks where the slaves lay sleepless. Whispers crept through the dark, quiet as breath. Plans, half-dreams, impossible ideas. Someone would say, "The Zereth do not guard the old factories as closely." Another would mutter, "I saw a soldier's weapon disassembled once. I remember the parts." And then silence again, for fear of listening ears. Yet in that silence, something grew. The Zereth thought humans had been stripped of their fire, but humans carried fire in their scars, in their grief, in the love they still felt for one another. A mother shielding her child from a guard strike. A worker giving up his ration so another could live. A prisoner humming a forbidden lullaby so soft only the wind could hear it. Every act of survival was rebellion. Every breath was defiance. And in the heart of this quiet defiance, a promise was born. Joran whispered it to himself when the chains felt too heavy. Lyra whispered it when she kissed her daughter's forehead at night. 100,000 nameless voices whispered it into the darkness where the Zereth could not hear. "We will not remain in chains. One day we rise." The Zereth believed fragility meant weakness. They believed silence meant surrender. But they had never learned the truth about fragile things. Break them enough times, and they learn how to cut. The Zereth thought they had stamped out every ember of resistance. In the endless mines, humans bent their backs and hauled stone, too exhausted to lift their heads. In the gutted cities, they trudged through rubble under the eyes of armored patrols. Even the skies were no longer their own, filled with Zereth drones and black ships blotting out the stars. But embers are strange things. They look small, weak, almost invisible, yet under the right breath they flare into fire. Joran carried his cart of ore down another tunnel, his shoulders hunched beneath the weight. He looked like every other slave, but his eyes were alive. He counted the footsteps of guards, studied the rhythm of their patrols, memorized the delay between when one torch faded and the next flared to life. He carried equations in his head the way others carried scars. That night, when the chains were locked and the guards withdrew, he leaned close to the others in his barrack. There's a weakness in the vents, he whispered. If air can escape, so can we. And if we can escape, we can find more. Most turned away. Fear was a cage tighter than chains. But a few listened. In the ruins above, Lyra walked carefully through the shadow of a Zereth factory. She carried scrap metal bundled under her cloak, pieces she had scavenged with her daughter's small hands. She traded them in the silent network of survivors. Metal for food, wire for water, batteries for whispers of resistance. Every trade was a risk. Every step could end with a lash or worse. Still she moved. Still she built. And across the broken world others did the same. A soldier once broken in battle now drilled young boys with sticks in secret alleys. An old woman remembered the schematics of engines and taught them to children who could draw in the dust. A farmer hid seeds beneath the floorboards of his hut, not for himself but for the day Earth would feed itself again. The Zereth never noticed. To them these were meaningless acts, insignificant gestures of a beaten people. But together, the gestures became sparks. Admiral Karos sat in his fortress chamber, drinking the rich oils of his homeworld. Reports scrolled across holographic displays. Ore production rising, slave mortality manageable, human uprisings non-existent. You see, he told his generals, his voice smug. This species has no fire. They are creatures of survival, not conquest. They endure, yes, but endurance is only slow death. Vera, his second, gave a low hiss of agreement. Yet beneath her scales, unease stirred. The human's eyes, always their eyes, haunted her. Eyes that did not break even when bodies did. She dismissed the thought. The Admiral was right. Chains were enough, but in the silence of Earth's night the sparks grew brighter. One evening, Jorn pressed his bloodied hands against the stone of the mine wall. The guards had grown lazy, careless. The vents above were real, just as he'd calculated. He had scraped them with broken tools until the rocks bled dust. Soon a tunnel would be wide enough to crawl through. He whispered to the others, "It begins here. We are not slaves forever. We will be more." Lyra, meanwhile, carried a small generator piece by piece through the ruins, hiding each under rubble until she could assemble it again. When it hummed to life, a tiny glow filled the darkness, a light no Zereth had given them. Her daughter laughed softly, the sound like music in a world that had forgotten song. That laugh spread. One family passed on the spark of hope. Another held it close, and in hidden places humans remembered what it was to plan, to dream, to prepare for a tomorrow that the Zereth could not see coming. The Zereth called humans fragile. And fragile things do break, but sometimes when they break, the pieces are sharp enough to cut the hand that holds them. The sparks had been lit. All it would take was one storm, one strike of lightning to turn them into a fire the galaxy would never forget. The sparks of resistance began as whispers, but whispers, when repeated enough, become voices. Voices, when carried by the desperate, become thunder. Deep in the mines, Jorn crawled through the narrow vent he had carved for months with nothing but broken tools and bloodied fingernails. When his shoulders scraped the stone, when his breath came ragged in the choking dust, he reminded himself, this is not escape. This is a passage to fight. On the other side of the vent lay an abandoned maintenance shaft the Zereth had long forgotten. To them it was useless space. To Jorn it was a cathedral, wide enough to hide people, hollow enough to echo plans, safe enough, at least for now, to gather. One by one others joined him, faces gaunt with hunger, eyes burning with something fiercer than food. At first they said nothing, only listened to the silence that wrapped them like a cloak. Then Jorn spoke. They believe we are fragile. They believe silence means defeat. But silence has been our shield. In the dark, they do not see us. In the quiet, they do not hear us. This is how we survived. But survival is not enough. It is time we burn. For a long moment, the cavern held its breath. Then a voice answered. We have nothing. Another. We have no weapons. Jorn's cracked lips curved in a thin smile. We have everything. We have knowledge. We have memory. We have hands that build, minds that imagine, and hearts that refuse to stop beating. The Zereth don't understand what that means. And so the hidden flame was lit. Above ground in the ruins of the city, Lyra carried messages between survivors. She taught her daughter to walk quickly, to look small, to seem invisible. And yet her child carried bundles of wire and scraps beneath her clothes. Every delivery mattered. Every act was defiance. In a gutted library, survivors gathered to map the city from memory. Old engineers recalled the power grids. Former students sketched the layouts of factories. Farmers described irrigation lines that could be poisoned or purified. Knowledge once fragmented began to stitch itself together. Still, there was fear. At every meeting, at every whispered exchange, someone would ask, "What if they find us?" And always the silence after was heavy. The Zereth punished rebellion with fire. Entire families vanished for less than a rumor, but Joran's answer never changed. Fear keeps us alive, but courage will keep us human. The first test came when a guard transport broke down near the mines. Normally, humans would lower their eyes and wait until the Zyreth fixed it. This time, Joran and his companions acted. They sabotaged the energy cells, slipping tiny fragments of ore into the conduits. By dawn, the transport exploded, leaving only twisted wreckage. The Zyreth thought it an accident. The humans said nothing. But in the tunnels, in the ruins, in the silence, they smiled. One small victory became another. A drone went missing in the forests. A supply route collapsed into a ravine. A Zyreth patrol vanished in the dust storms. None of these alone could win a war. But together they fed the flame. Admiral Karos grew irritated. Reports of delays cluttered his desk. He snarled at his commanders. The humans lack teeth. These are inconveniences, not resistance. Do not insult me with excuses. His generals bowed, their armor clattering, but unease rippled through them. The humans had no fleets, no armies, yet somehow cracks were spreading. In the mines, Joran sharpened shards of stone into blades. In the ruins, Lyra's generator hummed stronger, powering stolen devices, and in the hearts of countless men and women something fierce stirred. The Zereth had stolen their songs. They had stolen their skies, but they had not stolen their will. The hidden flame grew. It flickered in the darkness, dangerous and alive. One spark could still be smothered, but a fire spreading through a forest of chains? That even the Zyreth could not contain. And so humanity prepared not for survival, but for return. The return of their voice. The return of their freedom. The return of their vengeance. The galaxy had laughed at fragile humans. Soon the galaxy would learn what fire fragile hands could make. The first spark drew fire. The Zyreth were not blind. Their scanners traced unusual energy signatures beneath the ruins. Their patrols found footprints where no human was supposed to walk. Their commanders smelled rebellion like smoke in the air. And the Zyreth did what they had always done. They answered with terror. The mines where Joran had once spoken became graveyards. Soldiers in black armor stormed the tunnels, their rifles glowing, their voices cold. They dragged the weak into the open, demanded names, demanded leaders. When silence was their only answer, they burned the shafts. The heat rose through stone until screams echoed muffled from the earth itself. Lyra watched from the ruins as flames leapt skyward. She clutched her daughter's hand, forcing her not to cry. The Zyreth drones hovered overhead, their lenses red as blood. If the child made a sound, they would hear. The galaxy had always believed humans were fragile. The Zyreth were determined to prove it true. Joran survived the burning. He stumbled into the cavern where the survivors had gathered, his face black with soot, his lungs choking on smoke. The others turned to him with eyes wide, begging for hope, begging for answers. He could give them neither. His voice broke. They killed everyone. Silence wrapped the cavern like a shroud. Mothers pressed their hands to their mouths. Fathers lowered their heads. Children stared without understanding. The hidden flame flickered, threatened to die, yet even in despair something remained. Not the fire of vengeance, not yet, but the ember of defiance. The Zyreth could take everything, family, home, future, but they could not erase the choice to resist. And so, in the ruins of Ashar, humans rose again. Lyra became a courier of more than messages. She carried hope. Each time she looked into another survivor's eyes, she whispered, "You are not alone." Her words were simple, but they spread like lifelines. In a world drowning in ash, people clung to them. Children who had once hidden now stood guard at the cavern entrances, their small hands holding sharpened metal scraps. Elders who had lived peaceful lives began to carve weapons, their fingers shaking but steady enough. Even the broken, those who had lost everything, gave their grief as fuel to the growing flame. But the Zereth pushed harder. Cities that still stood were flattened into rubble. Entire blocks were sealed off, starved until no voices remained inside. Villages were erased from maps with plasma fire. Admiral Karos declared it proudly. Let them learn their fragility. Let them know despair. Despair did come. It walked hand in hand with hunger, with exhaustion, with the unbearable weight of death. In the tunnels, in the ruins, survivors argued. We cannot win, some said. It is too much. We should bow our heads, save what little remains. Joran listened, his eyes hollow. He wanted to agree. He wanted to lay down, to stop fighting, to stop feeling. But then he remembered the miners who had died in the burning shafts. He remembered their screams echoing through stone. He remembered that their silence had not been weakness, it had been strength. They had died rather than betray their own. And he whispered, not for himself, but for all who listened. If we give in, we are already dead. If we fight, we carry them with us. The cavern went quiet. And then one by one, heads lifted. The ember glowed brighter. The turning point came at dusk. A Krell supply ship descended into the ruins, its engines humming, its hull unguarded. The Zyrith thought the humans too broken to act. They thought fear had chained them forever. But Joran and his companions attacked. With nothing but stolen fuel and blades of scrap, they stormed the transport, their cries shaking the walls. Blood stained their hands, tears streaked their faces, and yet they did not stop. When dawn rose, the humans stood inside the captured ship. For the first time in years, they commanded something more than their chains. The Zyrith retaliated again, harder than ever before. Villages burned. Fields were salted. Families vanished into prisons from which no voice returned. But something had shifted. No matter how much blood they spilled, no matter how many ashes fell, the Zyrith could not erase what had begun. Humanity had learned the truth. Fragility was not a curse. Fragility was the wound that made them feel, the loss that made them fight, the pain that gave them fire, and in the ashes and blood, that fire burned brighter than ever before. Victory had a taste, but it was bitter. The captured Zyrith supply ship loomed in the cavern hangar like a beast forced into a cage. Its lights flickered, its metal skin bore the scratches of human hands, its engines rumbled with power stolen from the enemy. For the first time in years, humanity held something more than rubble. They held a weapon, yet no one cheered. Not truly. Every face that looked upon the ship also carried the faces of the dead. The miners burned in their tunnels. The children starved in the sealed blocks. The families erased without warning. The ship was a victory, yes, but it was paid for in oceans of grief. Lyra stood at its ramp, her daughter clinging to her side. The child asked softly, Mama, is this ours now? Lyra's throat tightened. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to say the war was ending, but she had seen the ashes too clearly. Instead, she knelt, brushing hair from her daughter's eyes. It is ours, but it costs us everything. We must remember. Memory became the currency of the survivors. In the tunnels, names of the dead were carved into stone. In the ruins, murals appeared on broken walls, faces, symbols, fragments of a culture the Zyrith had tried to crush. In the silence of night, the old sang lullabies, not for comfort, but for remembrance. Joran carried memory differently. He bore it like a weight across his shoulders. Each scar on his arms marked a life lost beside him. Each nightmare carried screams he could not silence. The ship should have been his triumph. He had led the assault, he had spilled the blood, he had taken it. But instead, it haunted him. He stood alone in the ship's cockpit one night, hands trembling on the console. His reflection in the glass looked more like a ghost than a man. He whispered to the darkness, how many more? How many more before we are free? The galaxy had called humans fragile, and in those moments Joran almost believed it. Fragile was the breaking inside him, the weight of memory pressing until he could barely breathe. But when he looked out at the stars, another truth came. Fragile things cracked, yes, but sometimes cracks let the light through. The Zyrith did not understand this. To them, memory was weakness. Their soldiers were conditioned to forget losses, to erase fear, to obey without thought. They believed this made them strong, but it also made them hollow. They could not comprehend a species that bled, that cried, that suffered, and yet grew stronger because of it. When the humans launched the captured ship into orbit, the Zyrith responded with fury. Patrol fleets converged, weapons charged, ready to reduce the vessel to dust. Yet the humans were ready. They had studied. They had remembered. They used the ship's codes against it, scrambling the enemy's sensors. They flew erratic patterns, unpredictable as the storms of Earth. They fought with desperation, but also with memory. Every mistake learned. Every loss engraved into their bones. For every ship they lost, they learned how to fly better. For every comrade who fell, their rage sharpened. Memory became their shield. Memory became their blade. In the tunnels, survivors wept over graves, but then they sharpened steel. In the ruins, children spoke the names of the fallen, but then they carried supplies to fighters. Even grief became part of the war machine. Lyra saw it most clearly in her daughter. The girl no longer asked when peace would come. Instead, she asked, "How do I help?" That question pierced Lyra's heart. No child should need to ask it, but she also knew this was what it meant to be human, to carry pain and still move forward. Admiral Karos raged in disbelief. How could fragile humans, scarred and broken, still resist? How could memory, something his own people saw as poison, make them stronger? He ordered extermination campaigns, vowing to end the rebellion once and for all. Entire planets were marked for culling. Yet with each strike, the humans rose again, heavier with grief, fiercer with resolve. For they had learned something the Zireth never would. Pain is not the end. Pain is the beginning, and in the weight of memory, humanity discovered its true strength. The galaxy had always seen humans as dust, small, fragile, fleeting. But now the dust had learned how to cut. The Zireth war machine stretched across half the spiral arm. Fleets darkened skies, armies marched in endless precision, and worlds burned to ash beneath their boots. For centuries, no resistance had endured. But on the edge of that empire, a single stolen ship lit a spark. And sparks, when fed with memory and rage, became fire. Joran stood at the center of the hangar, staring at the growing fleet. Once there had been only scraps, shuttles, cargo haulers, rusting wrecks fitted with stolen Zireth cannons. Now there were warships. Not many, but enough to sting. Enough to remind the galaxy that humans were not yet broken. Each ship bore scars like the people who crewed them. Hulls welded from scavenged wreckage, engines salvaged from enemy ships, panels painted with murals of the fallen, faces, names, words of defiance scrawled in bright colors that glowed under neon lights. They were not polished or uniform. They were alive. Lyra watched from the edge, her daughter holding her hand tightly. The girl's eyes shone, reflecting the ship's lights. "Mama," she whispered, "are we winning?" Lyra hesitated. The truth was complicated. For every battle they won, 100 more loomed ahead. The Zireth still had numbers beyond counting, weapons that could level cities with a glance. But for the first time, the humans had momentum. They were no longer prey. They were hunters. So she answered softly, "We are turning the tide," and she believed it. The turning point came in the Scareth system. A mining colony, enslaved and stripped, had sent a desperate signal. Zireth cruisers patrolled above, grinding the people beneath their boot heels. In the past, humans would have hidden, waited, survived quietly. Not now. Joran led the strike personally. The fleet dropped from warp with engines roaring, neon-lit ships slicing through the void like blades of vengeance. The Zireth cruisers scrambled, certain they could crush the humans with ease. But what they faced was no rabble. It was memory forged into steel. The humans fought with unpredictability that machines could not anticipate. They flew into the teeth of enemy fire, only to slingshot through asteroid fields and emerge on the other side with weapons blazing. They turned wreckage into cover, debris into traps. Every move was reckless, illogical, and devastating. Joran himself piloted the stolen Zireth vessel, his voice steady over comms. "They think us fragile. Show them what fragility becomes when pressed too far." The battle raged for hours. Human ships tore into the cruisers, sacrificing themselves if it meant taking one enemy down. Crews sang old Earth songs over open channels, their voices raw with defiance. When the first Zireth cruiser exploded, a cheer shook the void. When the second fell, the enslaved miners rose up from below, turning on their oppressors with stolen weapons. By the time the last cruiser broke apart, the Skarath system was free. The miners wept as the human fleet descended. For the first time in living memory, they saw ships that did not come to enslave, but to liberate. Word of the victory spread faster than fire. Across the galaxy, whispers began. The fragile species had won a system. The fragile species had built ships. The fragile species had bloodied the Empire, and those whispers became hope. Other oppressed peoples, long silent, began to stir. They had seen the Zireth as inevitable, invincible, but now they saw humans, scarred, small, yet unbroken, standing against the storm. And they began to wonder, if humans could rise from chains, what excuse did they have to remain in them? Admiral Karros raged in fury. He doubled the fleets, ordered exterminations, demanded the eradication of this plague of humans. But even as his armadas swarmed, something shifted. Fear crept into Xyrath ranks. Soldiers began to whisper that killing humans only made them stronger. Commanders hesitated, knowing each fragile survivor could become tomorrow's weapon. The tide had turned. Joren stood at the war table, maps of the galaxy projected in blue light. He saw not just the stars but paths of fire, of resistance, of liberation. He saw the shape of something larger than vengeance, something unstoppable. We were born in chains, he told the Council of Survivors. But chains taught us what freedom means, and that makes us dangerous. The humans were no longer fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. And for the first time in the galaxy's long memory, the Xyrath Empire trembled. The Xyrath capital had never been breached. For 10,000 years, its black towers pierced the clouds, its spires crowned with banners of conquest. Armadas guarded the skies, endless fleets patrolled the outer systems, and the people believed their empire eternal. But eternity had met humanity. The human fleet arrived like thunder. No longer a ragged swarm of scavenged ships, but an armada reborn in fire. Hulls gleamed with scars that had become symbols. Neon-lit emblems of survival painted across steel. Captured Xyrath dreadnoughts flew alongside human-made war machines. United under one banner, not of dominance, but of freedom, Joren stood at the heart of it all, eyes fixed on the black jewel of the Xyrath homeworld. His voice carried across the fleet. They forged chains for us. We broke them. They called us fragile. We endured. Today we end not just their rule, but the belief that might makes right. Today the tyrants fall, and the fleet surged forward. The battle for the Xyrath capital was like nothing the galaxy had ever witnessed. Waves of defenders poured into orbit, their fleets blotting out the stars. Yet the humans pressed on, weaving through the chaos with impossible precision. Every ship carried the weight of memory. Every weapon bore the names of the dead. They were not simply fighting an empire. They were fighting history itself. The centuries of silence forced upon them. Xyrath commanders shouted in disbelief as their shields failed under weapons improvised from mining drills and redirected star-core energy. Human tactics made no sense, reckless and brutal. But each sacrifice tore deeper into the heart of the empire. And then, for the first time in 10 millennia, the black towers of the capital shook. Inside the ruling chamber, the Xyrath Council gathered. Their skin glittered like stone, their voices laced with arrogance even as fear gnawed at their edges. At their center knelt Admiral Karros, once unshakable, now trembling. "They are unstoppable," he rasped. "They bleed and rise again. We slaughter them and they turn our blades into banners. We thought them fragile, but their fragility is their strength. Every wound becomes a weapon. Every loss becomes a vow." The counselors, once drunk with power, fell silent. Outside, the sky blazed with fire. The fragile species they had mocked was at their gates. On the surface, liberation had already begun. Humans stormed through the streets not to destroy but to free. Chains shattered. Doors long sealed opened to light. The oppressed peoples of 100 worlds rose with them, voices echoing in languages the Xyrath had tried to erase. And then it happened. The great council doors opened. The rulers of the galaxy's most feared empire looked up and saw humans, not cloaked in rage or vengeance, but weary, scarred, unyielding. Soldiers, survivors, and children alike stood in silence, watching. Joren stepped forward. His armor was cracked, his face lined with exhaustion, but his voice carried like a storm. "You called us weak. You made us slaves. You burned our worlds. And still we stand. We do not come to enslave as you did. We do not come to shatter as you did. We come to end what you began." Admiral Karros, broken and defeated, fell to his knees. His ornate armor clattered against the stone floor. One by one, the other Xyrath leaders lowered their heads, the weight of their empire collapsing around them. The tyrants had fallen, not to annihilation, but to mercy they had never understood. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. Humanity, once mocked as fragile, now stood as liberators. Chains lay shattered in the dust, and the stars themselves seemed brighter. Lyra held her daughter in her arms as the broadcasts reached every freed world. "Mama," the girl whispered again, "did we win?" This time Lyra did not hesitate. She smiled through tears. Yes, we won. And so did everyone. When the banners of humanity rose above the Zyrith capital, they carried no crown, no decree of conquest, only a promise, never again. The galaxy had seen empires built on fear, on cruelty, on domination. But now it saw something new, an empire of memory, of resilience, of fragile creatures who had risen from chains to conquer not through hatred, but through hope. Humanity had been underestimated, ridiculed, enslaved, but fragility had become fire, and fire had reshaped the stars. The galaxy was no longer the empire's. The galaxy was free.